Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, Michael people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. The first week of June has plenty of sports talk to dissect as I share all that's swirling in my head, heart, and soul as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And if last night is any indication of how the Stanley Cup Finals is going to go with a Game 1 in the books between the Florida Panthers and Edmonton Oilers, this will surely be a wild ride and an instant classic, because last night's game, not only just for the city of Edmonton, who have not won a championship since 1990, and for the country on a whole since 1993, and people could say, well, JAYREELZ, what does Edmonton and the entire nation of Canada have anything to do with a championship? Well, we all know that hockey is Canada's sport, and knowing that the Montreal Canadiens, back in the aforementioned year of 1993, when they won their last Stanley Cup and the country on a whole, it's a scenario where they're looking to exalt, they are looking to celebrate. And what we saw there last night was step one of a four-step process in order for them to finally capture their sport's first championship. And for the Oilers in their own right, as we talked about on Monday during the preview, this is a team that I feel, and this was prior to last night's game, so you could go back and check the receipts, that this could be their time. And as I unpack this game and even get to that question, whether or not this is their time, and granted it's only one game, so we can't get crazy and super geek up to think that this is already in the books. It's a shoo-in that the Oilers are just going to cruise to a Stanley Cup championship. But last night was a game that was thrilling, was a big-time comeback for a team that has firepower, left, right, up, down, sideways, no matter which direction you may look at. And to see the resolve and the grit and the determination of this finesse Oiler team is definitely one that I'm sure Paul Maurice, the head coach of the Panthers, certainly has, not in the back of his mind, but it's in the forefront, because what you saw there last night seems to be a different team than the one that they faced last year in the Stanley Cup Finals, where the Panthers won in 7 games. And even though you have to think back, remember, I've said it a zillion times throughout this playoff run, where Edmonton was 0-3 in that Cup Final a year ago, and they came all the way back to push it to a Game 7 before losing 2-1 in Sunrise. But for Edmonton, they got out of the gate quickly with the Leon Draisaitl goal about 1:06 into the game. But then Florida was able to capitalize with 3 straight goals. And you kind of thought to yourself, with Stuart Skinner, who one of those goals you could actually question and put on him. But when they trailed 3-1 and it was early second period, you kind of thought to yourself, that next goal is going to be critical. So whether the Panthers go up 4-1, and that's not to say that the Oilers cannot come back from a 3-goal deficit, but just a minute and a half right afterwards, where Arvidsson scored that goal, where although it was screened there a little bit by both an Oiler and a Panther player, but it looked like Bobrovsky, who had it almost nestled between his right armpit and his chest cavity, but it actually squirted through into the back of the net, and that was a huge goal because it made it 3-2. And then as you get to the third period, when you had Mattias Ekholm, the defenseman who had been out since April, although returned in the previous series in a Game 5 against Dallas, scored the tie-breaking goal there with about 13 minutes to go in the third period. And then it was back and forth with opportunities abound. But when you get to the overtime, you had a scenario where the Panthers came out flying. They had opportunity after opportunity, whether it was Sam Reinhart coming close to scoring a goal, Carter Verhaeghe, who's a guy that's always Johnny on the spot when it comes to big-time clutch playoff goals, especially overtime goals, who I believe is the leader among active players. And the Panthers were knocking on the doorstep a couple of times to where it looked like Stuart Skinner may have given up the big-time goal, which would have had the Panthers up 1-0 in the series. And then the Oilers had a couple of chances in the middle of the first overtime where you had the breakaway by Kasperi Kapanen, who had a great opportunity on a breakaway, but it just went to the right of, or really to the left of, Sergei Bobrovsky. And then you had another opportunity later on where you had a play in front where Travis Frederick was knocking on the door, and it just happened to catch Bobrovsky right there at the doorstep. So with all these opportunities that had gone more so for the Panthers in the first part of the overtime, and then during the middle part, the Oilers looked like they were ready to capitalize. But it wasn't until late in the first overtime where you had a fatal penalty, and one that, listen, what are you going to do when you're Tomas Nosek, who dumps the puck over the glass deep in their defensive zone? An inexcusable and inexplicable play, and there was a little bit of pressure there by Edmonton during that flurry, but nothing to the point where it was out of desperation. You had to do whatever it took to clear the puck, where you can at least say, all right, that's still not a good penalty, but at the same time, they were in just psychotic, desperate mode just to clear the puck, and it just so happened to clear the glass and into the crowd. But then you had Johnny on the spot again, Leon Draisaitl, who opened the scoring on a beautiful pass by Connor McDavid there in the overtime on the power play, right in front of the net, point blank, a one-timer past Sergei Bobrovsky, and the Oilers win game one, coming behind 3-1 in the second period to take the first game and draw first blood in what's going to be a long series. And even though the Oiler fan right now has to be pumped up, and rightfully so, considering not that the team was left for dead, but as I mentioned, having that determination and maybe a different outlook this year, knowing what it takes to win these games. And as I mentioned on Monday and dating back to even last Thursday, where the Oilers have now won 13 of the last 15 playoff games. After that 0-2 start in the opening round against the Kings, they have pretty much run the table to the tune of a 13-2 record. And now that they have the Panthers on their heels a little bit, and something to think about, granted that the game number 2 will be played tomorrow night, so there is a quick turnaround. Not much to sit with if you're the head coach and the team that plays in Sunrise, but they certainly have to have their antenna up and certainly have been put on notice that this Oilers team seems to be different than the one from a year ago. Now, as far as the Oilers, is this their time? There's still plenty of hockey to be played. It's only one game. This is a team that obviously has been on a tremendous run here over the last few years, and they were this close last year from having one of the most monumental comebacks in not only just NHL history, but in sports history. And yes, we've seen 0-3 comebacks in the sport, and even in the Stanley Cup dating back to the 40s, I believe, between Detroit and Toronto. But that was many, many moons ago, where not many people alive witnessed that. So if Edmonton would have been able to sweep after losing the first 3 games, that would have been a story and certainly a series that would have been talked about forever. But of course, they fell short of that, and you would have thought from that moment on, as much as it hurt and the pain was going to sting, it would sit with them for a whole calendar year. And here it is. Now, a year later, obviously a couple of weeks shy of a year, but for this Oiler team to know what it takes to get to this point, and having a captain who, as I talked about on the live stream yesterday, YouTube, 12 noon Eastern time every Wednesday, for those who aren't aware. So definitely want to peep that. But I talked about it yesterday, knowing that the last thing that Connor McDavid needs to achieve in his hockey career is to win a Stanley Cup. He's done anything imaginable that you could possibly think of when it comes to all of the hardware and the awards of him winning the Art Ross Trophy. Geez, let me enunciate here, JAYREELZ. The Art Ross Trophy for scoring the most points in the regular season. He's done that 5 times. He's won 3 MVPs. He's done anything that you could possibly think of on an ice surface except win a Stanley Cup championship. And then to think, last year, he did win the playoff MVP, but in a losing effort. So I'm sure that award, wherever that may be, is sitting somewhere in his home, but it's probably in the basement, knowing that it came in a losing effort, where he's probably looking at that trophy thinking, if I want to win a Conn Smythe, it's because I want to be the last team on the mountaintop standing with the trophy raised over my head as the captain of the Edmonton Oilers. So I think this is their time. Now, Florida, they're going to be heard from in the series. And even if Edmonton wins tomorrow night to go up 2-0, this series is far from over, because I can see Florida win the next 2 in Sunrise. And of course, we won't have to worry about that till next week, because you only have the one game between now and Monday's podcast, to where game 3 is going to be Monday night. So it's not a situation where it's Wednesday, Friday, and then Sunday in Florida. They had the extra day for travel, where they'll play Monday night and then next Thursday, which is kind of weird, only because they spread it apart 3 days. But then game 5 is a quick turnaround from Thursday night to Saturday night in Edmonton. So instead of getting the extra travel day where maybe they could have spread it out to the point where they would have had Thursday and then Sunday, because it wouldn't disrupt the NBA Finals, because NBA Finals next week is Wednesday, Friday, and then Monday. So they actually could have played Sunday, that game, but instead they decided to play Saturday. So I don't know why, with the quick turnaround, flying from Fort Lauderdale to Edmonton certainly isn't a 2-hour flight. And obviously you're going 2 time zones and pretty much as high, as well north on this planet that you could possibly go when it comes to having a city that has a pro team, and in this case, a hockey club. But I would think that Florida, they'll be heard from in the series, whether it be tomorrow night or not. But I think Edmonton right now, with all of the momentum and all the gas that's in their tank right now, I think they're going to go up 2-0 in the series. And especially after last night, how could you not? Trailing 3-1, tying the game in the third, winning it in overtime where the Panthers had ample opportunity to win. And I understand you had a couple of chances there by Edmonton as well. But to me, this seems to be a team that's destined to win the Stanley Cup this year. And that's what I went by on Monday. That's what I've seen here over the last month and change, knowing that they have only lost 2 games here in the prior 3+ series. I mean, think about that. They haven't gone to 6 and 7 game series since the first round. They've polished off the Stars and the Vegas Golden Knights in 5 games. And then in the previous series, as I mentioned, they swept the Kings after losing the first 2 games. So why would this train be derailed there in Edmonton all of a sudden? And granted, Florida, maybe they're at this point feeling the effects of the travel, feeling the effects of 3 straight Stanley Cup appearances. Who knows? Now, it's only 1 game, not to get crazy about that, but these are some nuggets to think about in the back of your mind when it comes to the Panthers having to go through another long playoff series and season, I should say. And then on top of that, facing a team that is hungry, that obviously beat them last year, and knowing that they want to return the favor in the only way they could possibly imagine, doing it in the Stanley Cup Final. And yes, there's a lot to look forward to in this series. I think it's going to go long. I said it's going to be Edmonton in 7, and I still wouldn't be shocked, even if Edmonton goes up 2-0 to Sunrise, that would still be the case. Could still see Florida winning 2 of the games at home after being down 0-2, and I could even see, by chance, if Edmonton goes up 3-1, I could see Florida winning a game 5 in Edmonton and then game 6 in Florida before having to go back to Edmonton for game 7 because of their recent track record, their pedigree, etc. And think about it. They were down 0-2 to the Toronto Maple Leafs just in this postseason, and they came back and won in 7 games after losing a game 6 in their building. So anything can happen. It's strange. You know I'm going to be on top of it. Looking forward to tomorrow night's game. And that's what we have there with a Stanley Cup Final. And as far as the loss for Florida, I don't think, not to say you're going to dust it off your shoulder if you're the Panthers, but right, again, you know that this team has come to play. You know that this team wants it, and they're certainly hungry for winning a title after what happened last year. But I think all will be calm. I'm sure they'll take a deep breath today, regroup, and come back to the rink tomorrow and give their best effort put forth and try to tie the series. And I wouldn't be surprised if they tie it. I think Edmonton will win tomorrow, which, who knows, will the sports fan get wrapped up in a series with Edmonton up 2-0 going back to Florida, where they took care of home ice, and knowing that they played last year with Florida up 3-0 in the series and Edmonton coming back? I don't know. I would think that the average sports fan, they may take a peek here and there, but they may not be wrapped up. Unless Florida wins tomorrow, then maybe they'll say, uh-oh, now we have a series. But as of right this very moment, I don't think there's any panic in that Florida dressing room. And I'm sure that the Oilers think that, hey, 1 game does not make a series, but we're certainly off on the right foot. And that was a game that they needed, people, because if they would have lost that game, knowing that they would have came from behind, down 2 goals, and then lost in overtime, that would have been a crushing defeat. And not to say that the series would have been over or Florida would have had their number, nothing to that degree, but you would really have to think that this Edmonton team, for all the hard work to get to this point, and then for them to come from behind, tie the game, and then lose it in overtime, that meant more for Edmonton than it did for Florida. So let's see if there's going to be any momentum that will carry Edmonton into this second game tomorrow night for victory, and then fly to South Florida to see if they could steal another game, or I shouldn't say steal, but they could win another game, and then maybe even bring it back to Edmonton for a coronation there in Game 5. Obviously, looking into my crystal ball, I'm not going to forecast that, but I certainly would not be surprised come Monday that Edmonton is up 2-0, and right now looking to see if they could get one of the next two in Florida. So we'll be on top of that, as you all know. And quickly with the hockey note, I know the Penguins had hired a new coach. Remember, Mike Sullivan, who they let go, went to the Rangers when they dumped Peter Laviolette. Well, I guess this was kind of a pseudo trade because the Penguins hired the Ranger assistant from last year, Dan Muse. So he's a young guy. I don't know much about Muse, but he gets anointed to the role as head coach of the Penguins. So let's see how that goes for the aging Crosby, Malkin, and Letang team, who have not made the postseason in the last couple of years. And if there's going to be a last hurrah, it's going to be with a young coach there. And let's see if he can infuse whatever knowledge and the little experience that he has to go along with this veteran-laden team to try to capture one last magic moment. Maybe not a cup, but maybe a moment to where they get to the postseason, win a round or two, and we'll see how that goes. But that's what you have with the hockey. And as I mentioned, looking forward to Game 2 tomorrow night. Now as I lace up my high tops and go through the NBA, as finally the finals will tip off tonight. And there isn't anything you can do. The schedule is what the schedule is. And I'm sure Adam Silver, as much as they hope for a 6 and 7 game series in the conference finals, and they were at least lucky to get a 6-game series with Knicks and Pacers. But considering that series ended Saturday, they had to wait 5 days to get to tonight, where we could finally look at Indiana and OKC to see how they're going to match up against one another for the course of, hopefully for them, at least 6, maybe 7 games. But a lot of the prognosticators are certainly thinking that OKC is going to win this in 5, and some have even predicted 4. Which now begs the question, and to me, when I talk about storylines with this series, and I mentioned this on the live stream yesterday, there are not a lot of juicy storylines in this series. Unlike Florida-Edmonton, which obviously had a history dating back to last year, and you want to talk about Canada not winning a cup and Edmonton not winning one forever, and Florida trying to go back-to-back. Yes, you got storylines there. The only ones that you have here with this series are, and to me, right out of the gate, is the pressure is squarely on Oklahoma City to win this championship. And if they do it in 7 games, it's almost as if it's a pseudo-minor upset that the Pacers would have taken the Thunder to a Game 7. Because based on what Vegas and a lot of the pundits and prognosticators, etc., they're giving the Pacers no respect. And I'm going to get to them in a second. But to me, this big question is, how much pressure are the Thunder to win this championship? Because they are favored to win this series by minus 750, which means that the Pacers' chance to win this final is 8-1. So if you put $1,000 on the Pacers and they win the finals, you're going to win $8,000. That's how big of an underdog they are here. So because of that, it makes you think, wait a second, Oklahoma City, you can't screw this up. If you don't win in, let's say, 6 games, because you got to give the Pacers at least 2 games in my eyes, and I'll talk about that in a second. But if you're not going to give the Pacers any dap here, that you think, oh, because of their size and because of SGA and because of their length, and obviously they match up well against the Pacers because they go 8, 9, 10 deep, similar to the Pacers, etc. And they're much more of a defensive team than Indiana is. And yes, Indiana could score, but the Thunder could throw Lou Dort, Jalen Williams, Kaysen Wallace, Alex Caruso, Chet Holmgren, all these defensive players where it's almost as if Indiana has no shot. So to me, I would think that with a young head coach, Mark Daigneault, and with young players, and I'm sure with an Indiana team that is relatively young, but they've been together for some time, and they've been the underdog throughout all these series. And maybe the Knicks series was closer. I'm sure a lot of people maybe even picked the Knicks to win. I thought Indiana was going to win in 7. And I picked Indiana to beat Cleveland in the previous round. Check those receipts. So it's not as if I'm jumping on their bandwagon now. But for whatever the reason, a lot of America and a lot of people who watch the NBA, follow it or follow sports, they think, oh, the Pacers have no shot. So therefore, I'd have to think, if you're the Thunder, there has to be some butterflies. There has to be something that's swimming inside to think that, oh, wait a minute, now the bullseye squarely on us. And you know the Pacers are going to relish that because going back to the Milwaukee series on a mild front, but with Cleveland, a lot of people thought, there's no way that Indiana's going to beat Cleveland. We saw what happened there. And even with Knicks Pacers, after last year with Indiana beating the Knicks at 7 in the conference semis, a lot of people thought, there's no way that the Knicks with home court again, they're going to lose this series. And we saw what happened there. And then now OKC, the 68-win regular season team, the team that swept Memphis, that beat the brakes off of the Timberwolves and sandwiched in between, yes, had a long gut check of a 7-game series against the Nuggets. But now it's like, here's the red carpet. So just like I talked about Edmonton, not ready to roll out the red carpet for them to win a Stanley Cup, but everybody is pretty much not only throwing the red carpet, but they're throwing bouquets, they're throwing rose petals, and they're throwing all the coconuts and palm trees that you could possibly imagine for a Thunder team that is going to win this series in a cakewalk. And I don't see it. I really don't. So to me, that is the 1, 2, and 3 storylines. I understand I'm stretching that a little bit, but there isn't any other way to look at this series other than that. Now, the flip side of that, the Pacers, you know they're using that as fuel because Rick Carlisle has pretty much said that, oh, wait a minute, we're the underdog here, whether it's in the Cleveland series or even in the Knicks series, and not having the respect of the general public or of the sports media, basketball media, etc. And I'm sure that he's saying, guys, we are 8-1 underdogs in this series. We have beaten the best team in the East. We beat a Knicks team that nobody expected us to beat. And then on top of that, Milwaukee, all right, fine. First round, they beat them last year in the first round as well. But nobody's showing us any respect. So the Pacers, and they've been on this magic carpet ride throughout this whole playoff series. You've watched the games. You've seen what's happened. I don't have to document all the miraculous come-from-behind victories in the final minutes of each one of these series. And to think, can they do it again in a fourth series? I don't know. That is certainly a question that I can't answer. We'll have to see it play out in front of us. But I think the Pacers, they're going to be game. And I could see them coming out like gangbusters tonight. And I would not be surprised if they win tonight in game 1. So just keep that in mind. But the Pacers, you know they're going to play with an edge. You know they're going to have that little chip on their shoulder. And Tyrese Halliburton, who's been on this gravy train with the whole being overrated and not being a guy that's one of the top players in the league, etc. So they're going to carry that until the wheels fall off. But the wheels could fall off against this team because this team, as we all know, is, I won't go as far as saying a juggernaut, but is certainly on the precipice of winning a final. And obviously, if they play the way they have been throughout the entire season, and maybe not so much the series against Denver, but the way they played against Memphis and obviously Minnesota, then they're probably going to win this in 5. But the other things I got to look at here with this series, and yes, we could talk about the Pacer offense versus the Thunder defense, and yes, that's a storyline. That's more of a matchup and what could factor in as far as how this series is going to unfold. So to me, that's not a situation where, it's a storyline. Because when it comes to storylines, we can look at the head coaching matchups where Rick Carlisle, who won a championship in Dallas, obviously very seasoned, has been around the block, where Mark Daigneault, this is his first time here in the final. So you have that angle. Then you had the scenario with SGA being a guy that could be one of 4 people in the history of the sport to win an MVP, lead the league in scoring, and win a championship in the same year. The only people that have done that are Kareem, Jordan, he did it 4 times, and the fourth person, off the top of my head, it's eluding me right now. Maybe I could look that up in between, but SGA is also on the cusp of being in that pantheon. It may have been Wilt, now that I think about it. I believe it was Wilt, so it'd be SGA, Wilt, Jordan, and Kareem. So yeah, you talk about rarefied air. SGA could be in the same sentence with those guys if he wins a championship. So for the storylines, again, there's not really many juicy storylines to get into. And we could talk about matchups all we want. We could talk about Aaron Nesmith as well as, you would think to a certain extent, Tyrese Halliburton. And I would also think Pascal Siakam, more so Siakam and Nesmith. I'm sure they're going to be the ones that are going to shadow SGA all over the place, and how much that's going to factor in, similar to what Tyrese Halliburton. I'm sure you're going to see a lot of Jalen Williams, a lot of Lou Dort, and a lot of their size is going to try to wear down the Pacers, and that's what's going to be the big theme. If the Thunder could just be physical, try to run them roughshod, and try to just wear them out, that's going to go a long way to see whether or not this Pacer machine offensively is going to be able to put up 125, 130, 135 points. And as the series go deeper, and obviously this is as deep as you could get, the NBA Finals, I could see OKC putting the clamps down. Although game one's going to be fascinating because you have a situation with the rest over rust or rust over rest when it comes to OKC because they've been off for now, 8 days? And even though the Pacers have had 5 days off, but for teams that have been in rhythm now, they got to get back in sync with the curtain raised on an NBA final. The spotlight is going to shine on them tonight because there's no hockey game, obviously no NFL. For the ones who watch baseball, that's right now in the clouds. But for those two teams who are going to go at it, and it's going to be, I think, a very entertaining final. But how this unfolds with the rest of America, similar to what I talked about with Edmonton and Florida, to me, if it's going to capture the imagination of the sports fan, and I'm talking about just the average sports fan, not the kook, the diehard, or the big-time basketball fan, but the Pacers have to get one of these next two, preferably this first one, because if they get the first one, then people will watch game two to see what OKC will do in that game and what they're made of. And if OKC wins, all right, then it goes back to Indiana, and then therefore you have a series. And even if Indiana wins game two, all right, maybe not many people will tune in, or unless you have one of those thrilling finishes that Indiana has been prone to do throughout the course of this postseason. But it's a scenario where I think that if it is 1-1, whether Indiana gets the first or the second, preferably the first as I detailed, but how I look at it is that it has to be 1-1 going to Indiana. If it's 2-0 OKC, and if they win in convincing fashion, not blowout fashion, not rocking chair, but convincing, they win by 8 to 12 points, that there wasn't a doubt that Indiana was going to come back to win the game, then people are going to probably be off the series or think that, all right, if Indiana wins game 3, I got to see them win game 4. To me, if it's going to generate any buzz, any interest, to me, Pacers have to win that first game, and it has to go back to OKC tied at 2. And let's see what happens there. Because if it's 2-0 Thunder, and the Pacers, they can win by 100 in game 3. OKC wins game 4, the series, for all intents and purposes, is going to be over. And it could end in 5 at that point. And if the Pacers do happen to split the first 2 games, and let's say OKC wins games 3 and 4, then that's going to end up being a dud as well. That's why if you want to get the ultimate drama and suspense, have the Pacers as the heavy underdogs that they are. Maybe it's a bit too strong for Vegas to give them those odds. But as I've said a million times, the underdog team has to win the odd number games. 1, 3, 5, and obviously 7, because if it's 3-3, they're going to have to win that game to win a championship. So by them winning games 1 and 3, that would secure a game 4, I'm sure a great rating, and obviously a lot of people are going to watch to see whether or not OKC is going to push this series to a 2-2 tie, or will the Pacers be up 3-1 going to Oklahoma City, which still I think a lot of people would watch, because then will Oklahoma City extend the series and then push it to Indiana, which the rating will just be even that much more higher. But that's the only way America's imagination is going to be captured here, because if it's going to be the ho-hum 2-0 and then 2-1 and then 3-1 OKC, forget it. America will be off it. Nobody will care. And OKC might as well just hand them the trophy, as they'll win an NBA championship. And with that said, I think it's going to be OKC's time. And to think, their window is just cracking with this core, which is unbelievable when you think about it. So how I see it, I can see the Pacers winning one of these first 2 games. And to me, they have to win the night, because if they don't, I can see OKC going up 2-0. Could I see Indiana winning the 2 games in their building? I could. But I could see this being a 5-game series. But I'm going to give the Pacers their due respect. I think they're going to win 2 games. But do I think it's going to be 2-2? I don't know. It's almost hard to say, because I think OKC, if they smell it, they're going to pounce. And although I want to say 5, but I'm going to give the Pacers 2 games, because obviously all the games that I watched here this postseason, just when you thought that they were going to falter, and they've had a couple of clunkers, the Game 5 in New York against the Knicks, Game 3 against Cleveland, the previous series, but those are the only two bad games that they had. And yes, they could put up a stinker. Can they put up 2 against OKC? They can. But for something tells me, I think that the series is going to go 6 games, and I can see OKC winning in Indiana for Game 6 to win a championship. And it's not impossible. We saw Golden State beat Boston 3 years ago in a Game 6 on the road. We've seen plenty of these teams win a championship on the opposing team's floor. And although my gut may say 5, but my head is saying, you know what? And usually you take your gut over your head. But I think that the Pacers will win 2 games and the Thunder will win a championship. And we'll have 2 games to discuss on Monday, because obviously tonight will be Game 1. Sunday you'll have Game 2. So we'll unpack the NBA Finals to start off the podcast there on Monday, where you only have the 1 hockey game there tomorrow night, as you know. So that is your schedule for both the Stanley Cup and NBA Finals heading into the weekend. And obviously I'll uncover that when we reconnect there on Monday. Now I have to get to this. The shocking news out of the NBA over the past couple of days, and you still hear reverberations of it in the city and throughout where I live in New York. When you had a team that upset the Boston Celtics, as they did in the conference semifinals, and then push the Pacers to a 6th game. Now, granted, the Pacers had a 3-1 series lead, and they were up 2-0, as we all know. But they took the series back to a 6th game. If I would have told a Knicks fan at the start of this postseason that you would have beaten the Celtics and gone to a 6th game in an Eastern Conference Final, which you have not been to in 25 years, with a coach that's won back-to-back seasons of 50 wins or more, and I understand you would have fallen 2 games short of an NBA Final, but would you have signed for that? I'm sure you would have said to yourself, hell yeah, beat the Celtics and then go to a 6th game? Absolutely. And here it was, for Tom Thibodeau, the now former coach of the New York Knicks, doing what no other coach since Jeff Van Gundy has done. And yes, we could go through the laundry list of them, whether your name is Isaiah Thomas, whether your name is Mike Woodson, whether your name is Derek Fisher, whether your name is Jeff Hornacek, whether your name is Isaiah Thomas. Did I say Isaiah Thomas? And right now, when you have a guy like Tom Thibodeau, and for whatever the reason, less than 72 hours after taking his team to a Game 6 of an Eastern Conference Final, Leon Rose, James Dolan, or William Wesley, otherwise known as Worldwide Wes, said, here's your pink slip, Mr. Thibodeau. Thanks, but no thanks. All the best to you on your way out the door. And mind you, Thibodeau just signed a 3-year extension after last year's run to a Game 7 in the conference semis against the Pacers. Now, I'm not trying to make Tom Thibodeau out to be Red Holtzman, but this was a crying shame. This is a raw deal that we have not seen in quite some time. And the sad part is that the Knicks, who finally, with their fan base, with the average or even with a good basketball fan, could honestly say that, wow, good things have happened to New York over the last few years. All right, it didn't culminate in a championship, but they've taken their steps. They've gone to the playoffs. They've won a round. They've now won 2 rounds. They made it to a Game 6 of an Eastern Conference Final. And as I said on Monday's podcast, how this Knicks team is a few bench players away, because you have your core there, whether it's Cat, whether it's Jalen Brunson, OG Anunoby. I know you got second apron stuff that you may have to deal with, but I would think James Dolan wouldn't care about the luxury tax because he wants to win a championship, or at least so we think. So now they just need role players, as evidenced by what we saw there, especially in the series against the Pacers, because with their length and their depth, obviously the Knicks couldn't match that. You're not going to bring in guys like Landry Shamet or guys like DeLon Wright off the bench to kind of piecemeal it in a last-ditch effort to try to give your starters a blow deep into a playoff series where it looks like the ship is sunk to the bottom of the ocean. So you want to get on Thibodeau for that? I guess you can, but you know what? He didn't have anywhere else to look or anywhere else to go to. So you can't put the complete onus on him. As I said on Monday, once they get the roster intact to where you get those role players off the bench, or a team that you could go to the 8th, 9th, or dare I even say the 10th man on the bench, and if for whatever the reason the Knicks couldn't get out of the second round, and if you want to say goodbye to Thibodeau then, all right, I guess you could look at it that way. But until they fortified that roster, I thought that the Knicks had a great chance to get themselves back to the same position that they were this year. Because the Celtics, the Bucks, and the Sixers, who were supposed to be at the top of the food chain when it comes to the Eastern Conference, right now they're big giant question marks. The Pacers, are going to be there. The Knicks, obviously. I don't think Orlando. I don't think Miami. Maybe the Detroit Pistons. I don't think Cleveland, despite the fact that they won 64 games, they were out in 5 games in the second round. Why would I think that they're going to be primed for a conference final or an NBA final next year? So here it is. It was all mapped out. And then you pull the plug on your head coach. And for what reason? Now, I heard all these different reports over the last 24 to 48 hours where people had said, oh, this has to be on James Dolan. And to a certain extent, I think that's correct. But based on what I read, and even heard for that matter, is that this falls at the feet partially of Leon Rose, which I find a little bit surprising only because Rose had given him the contract extension last year and is also Tom Thibodeau is his client. Because if you recall, Leon Rose was an agent to many NBA players and coaches before being anointed as the VP of basketball ops at Madison Square Garden. And with Worldwide West on his side, he was a guy that obviously with the collective and collaborative effort of the front office, they were the one that made these decisions when it comes to coaching, personnel, etc. But based on what I read with the tea leaves, that William Wesley was the guy that couldn't stand Thibodeau and wanted him out on his ear. Which makes me think, Worldwide West, I understand you got this name. Now, really, has this guy, despite his reputation and despite his renowned nickname, what has he really done? Has he ever been a top executive on another NBA team? I know he's been hobnobbing with guys like LeBron and some of the top players, whether it's Dwayne Wade, and you could go through all those players of the late aughts into the 20 teens, where he got his reputation as a basketball, I guess you could say, conduit or connector. Because it's not as if this guy was a GM or a vice president or anything of that ilk to where you could say, oh, wow, he certainly has made his bones by being a front office executive with several other teams in the NBA. Based on what I've seen, it's only been here with the Knicks. So if Worldwide West and Thibodeau couldn't stand one another, and he said to Rose and to Dolan, we got to go in a different direction. We need to get him out of here. And for Rose, I guess, to have to say to Thibodeau, I'm sorry we have to do this to you. And if for Dolan, who's the owner, who could come out and say, wait a minute, this guy, for the first time in 25 years, have ignited our building to the point where we haven't seen this in a quarter of a century. And one more time, I'm not trying to make Tom Thibodeau out to be Red Holtzman or even Pat Riley or Phil Jackson for that matter. But he's done more over the last 5 years than any Knicks coach has done since Jeff Van Gundy. And that goes back to the late 90s into the early 2000s. Because since then, it has been a wasteland at the Garden. Nothing but tumbleweeds. All right, you had the 1 year there with Carmelo in 2013 where you lost to, again, the Pacers. But it's unfathomable to think that they just sent this guy packing. But this is the Knicks. They go from a team that is built on what they've done over the last few years. The move to sign Jalen Brunson, which has been frowned upon in some circles, but has probably been the best free agent signing by far in Knicks history. And to add those pieces around him and to bring in a head coach who I get is supposed to be defensive minded and didn't show anything but that, especially in that game 6. But this was a guy that brought you back to relevancy, brought the buzz back in the building. You see Ben Stiller and Timothée Chalamet and Spike Lee and everybody going to Indiana to watch the Knicks on the road. That now the Knicks have finally looked like they are back. And what do? They screw up a lottery ticket. They pulled the plug. They made themselves from respectability to back to being a laughingstock. And what's going to make it worse is who they hire. And who are they going to hire? Is it Michael Malone? Is it going to be Jay Wright? Dare I even say Danny Hurley? Because I'll say this, and then I'll move on. I know if it's going to be William Wesley, the guy to blame, to me, they're all to blame. Whether it's Wesley, whether it's Leon Rose, and obviously the owner. Because they're all in cahoots here. And one of those three, they could have had a meeting of the minds, and I'm sure they did, but to me, the owner could have been the guy that, I'm not doing this. I've never stepped foot or tried to impede on the organization's progress and process, but you know what? This guy deserves to be here. He didn't do that. And Brunson in the postgame, after they got eliminated, said that, yes, Thibs is my guy. And if Mikal Bridges was the one guy that may not have had a connection there with the head coach, then come on, Mikal Bridges, a guy he traded 5 first-round picks for, who has never been an All-NBA player or even an All-Star for that matter, now all of a sudden his word is gospel? I mean, come on. You can't make it up. Now, who that coach is going to be, I don't know. But it's better be of someone of championship ilk. And I don't know what's going on down there at 33rd and 8th, but if they're going to bring in some young upstart or a retread a la Michael Malone, who is pretty much a better version of Tom Thibodeau because he has a championship, but he has the defensive mind and is the type of guy that's going to run his players to the ground. And I get it that Denver traded off, and a lot of those guys, the Bruce Browns and the KCPs of the world, were free agents, so they went elsewhere. So therefore, their depth went out the window, as you saw here in the last couple of years, only getting to a 7th game of the 2nd round, albeit this year was actually Herculean for that matter. But what the Knicks are going to do here is going to be fascinating, because for them to do this now and wanting to win a championship, even if it is Michael Malone, it's almost like, all right, here's the guy. He's Tom Thibodeau 2.0. All right, he won a championship, but that's that. It's almost as if you have to bring in a guy like Eric Spoelstra. It's almost as if you got to bring in a guy like Greg Popovich, who just retired. Because anything less than that, I'm sure the fan base is going to be up in arms. So I'm going to leave you with that, because this has just been, and I'm not a Knicks fan, everybody knows, this has been a flat-out disaster for the fan base, and I'm sure that this is one that they're still grumbling about 48 hours after the fact, and are certainly checking their Twitter feeds to see who the rumor or who is the hot rumor up next to get the coaching job. And once that position is filled, I'm sure that is going to be scrutinized like never before. And then lastly, and I'll close on this, I promise, you're not going to hear anything from this front office. They let out a statement a couple days ago. Oh, we thank Coach Thibs for his contribution. We wish him well, but it's all about winning a championship based on what we saw here over the course of this past postseason. They're never going to face a camera. They're never going to step in front of a microphone. They're never going to meet the media. They're never going to put themselves in any way, shape, form, or fashion to where they're going to be criticized, to where they're going to be even ridiculed. They're not going to do that. In fact, they make Bill Belichick out to be Jim Mora, where Belichick doesn't give you anything, but the Knicks, forget about it. They're Fort Knox. So let's see how this is going to shape up, because I got news for you. This is not going to be pretty. It hasn't been pretty so far, and I don't think it's going to get prettier based on who their replacement's going to be. All right, now, as far as another coaching note in the NBA, the Phoenix Suns, and speaking of owners, Matt Ishbia hires Jordan Ott. Who? He was an assistant on the staff of Kenny Atkinson for the Cavaliers. So Phoenix, who went from Frank Vogel, or I should say Monty Williams, to Frank Vogel, a guy who won a championship, to Mike Budenholzer, another guy who won a championship, to now Jordan Ott, a guy that you couldn't even pick out of a lineup. And I'm not trying to pick on the guy by any means, but here's Matt Ishbia trying to now go the other way to see if the young, hot assistant is going to be one that's going to get everybody on the same page. But we all know it's their roster that needs a makeover, not the head coach. So we'll see how that unfolds there in the Valley of the Sun. All right, now let me get in the batter's box, talk a little baseball, because we have a series that will conclude today out in Chavez Ravine, and it's been a fascinating one. I know last night, more so for the Met fan than the Dodger fan, that was one that the Mets were able to pull away. They won 6-1 based on the bat of a one, Pete Alonso, who had 5 RBIs and 2 home runs. And Griffin Canning, I can't get on his case, although he had a couple of stinkers here, lost to the White Sox in their one loss at home when they had the White Sox and the Rockies come to town. And actually, they played over the weekend against the Dodgers, so they did lose the Friday night game. And for Canning, and he actually pitched that Friday night game, didn't get a decision. But for Canning, who has put some stinkers up, but he's pitched well against the Yankees at Yankee Stadium, and they only win in that series. He's pitched well against the Dodgers here in those couple of games. He also pitched well against the Cubs when they were at Citi Field. So I got to admit, a guy who I crucified, and even with David Stearns, why are you signing this guy? And I want to Walker Buehler, and Buehler's on the IL right now. So I cannot say boo at this moment when it comes to Griffin Canning, who pitched well last night. 6 innings, all right, 6, not 7, 8 that you'd like, but pitched very well last night in that victory. But the first 2 games were playoff atmosphere, were white knucklers, were great baseball games for early part of June. I get it. People say, well, JAYREELZ, it's only June. Who cares? What about October? Well, we can't talk about October until we talk about June. So for the games there on Monday and Tuesday night, where the Mets had a 2-0 lead and 4-2 late, where Ohtani hit a home run in the 7th and then tied the game with a sac fly there in the 9th, and then the Mets were able to sweat out a victory. Edwin Diaz blows his first save, but they sweat out a victory with Jose Butto on the mound with first and second, and they were able to get a couple of big outs there, and the Mets secured a 5-4 win there on Monday. And then on Tuesday night, where they had another lead, they were actually trailing 4-1, came back to take the lead. Soto hits a home run there, as well as Alonso. And for the Mets to take a 5-4 lead, headed to the 9th inning, where they couldn't use Edwin Diaz. They brought in Huáscar Brazoban, who has pitched well there in relief. But with Diaz closing 3 of the previous 4 games, obviously he was not going to be called out of the bullpen to pitch 4 or 5. But Brazoban gives up a leadoff homer in the night to Max Muncy to tie the game, and then they lose in extras. Tough loss there for the Mets, but they bounced back nicely with a win there yesterday. And now, whether or not could the Mets leave Dodge in an afternoon tilt where David Peterson will go up against Landon Knack, the young right-hander, could they win 3 out of 4 out in LA and actually win the season series 5-2? Now, again, it's June. Are people going to really be wrapped up in that? I only bring it up for this reason. Because the Mets, after losing to the Dodgers last year in the postseason, and we understand that's when it counts, that's when it matters 1,000%. But knowing that they lost, and the Dodgers, who I understand that their starting rotation is right now on the MASH unit with the likes of Roki Sasaki, Blake Snell, and Tyler Glasnow on the shelf, but if they are whole come October, it could be a whole different story. But they are still the Dodgers, and they are still in first place. But do the Mets stack up well? Are these the top 2 teams in the National League? Will we see these top 2 play and face off in another NLCS? Now, there's a fraction of people in Philadelphia that will say, hell no. There's a fraction of people in Chicago that will say the same thing. And I'm sure there's people down the 5 freeway in San Diego that say, no way. But right now, these 2 teams are looking to be the best. And granted that the Mets and Phillies are neck and neck in the NL East, and the Mets and Dodgers, I get it. They've played now 7 of the last, in the last 2 weeks, they played 7 times, and will play their 7th game today. But as of right this very moment, the Mets look like they stacked well against the Dodgers, and they played well against them. And they could have won that first game there, that Friday night, where they came from behind 5-2 and had ample opportunities to win the game in extras, but lost. And then obviously could have won the game there on Tuesday night, and we could look at it from a big picture that they could actually be 6-0 against this team heading into the series finale today. But I would think, could Dave Peterson win a game here and push the Mets out of LA 3 out of 4 going to Colorado? I think they can. Why not? And I'm sure to a man in that locker room, they're probably thinking, no, come on, let's get the series win here. Let's not be satisfied. And the Dodgers reeling here a little bit as they've now lost. They lost the game on Friday. They lost 3 of the last 4. No, not Friday. They lost on Sunday to the Yankees. They lost now 2 or 3 to the Mets here. So I would think the Dodgers want to try to get back on the beam. And Peterson, who's pitched okay, and I would expect another okay performance. But if the Mets bats continue to score some runs, and Landon Knack, who had a rocking chair game when they won 18-2 against the Yanks there on Saturday, who knows? So you know what? I'm going to say the Mets go out and win today. And I think these 2 are the best teams. Now, Philly, we know they have a very good rotation. I know no Aaron Noli's on the IL, and they have a very good veteran-laden lineup. But their bullpen is from hunger. I'm sorry, no Jose Alvarado, he's a guy that is walking on a tightrope when he comes in. Very talented, but walks the ballpark and gives up big runs in big spots. And to me, they need some reinforcements in that bullpen because the Orion Kerkerings and even the Jordan Romanos, would scare me if I'm a Philly fan, although live arms, but still. Now, I think these right now are the two best teams in the National League, but we'll have to see how that plays out throughout the rest of this spring and into the summer to see where these two teams will stand when we get to October and beyond. So that's what you have there. And speaking of the Rockies, where the Mets will go to Colorado, break them up. The Rockies completed a sweep. Remember, on Monday after the Mets just took the brooms out and swept them down to South Florida, they were 9-50. And we're on a pace to think that after, would it be 118 games, they would have been 18-100. But right now, they've exponentially have increased that to the point where they could be now 24-100 because of the sweep in Miami. And again, the Marlins are the Marlins. They have certainly have been pushed out to sea, and they have been for, I guess, the last couple of weeks, but they pretty much played well the first 6 weeks of the season, but now they're certainly just barely on a life raft somewhere out to sea. And for the Rockies to go in there and Hunter Goodman hitting home runs left and right all over the place, and kudos to them. And I guess that's a good blessing for the Mets because after they swept the Marlins, now they're going to go back home, feel good about themselves, and hopefully the Mets will cool them off considerably, especially with a victory in LA today. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But the Rockies, and I know I've talked badly about them, but how could you not, considering what they've done here to start these first 2+ months of the season? Now, are they going to break? And it's not really break the record because the modern record here from 1901 on, they've had the third worst start in Major League Baseball history, with the other two starts of teams playing in the 19th century. But to me, when we look at the barometer, and I understand the White Sox were 41-121, where the Mets were 40-120, are they going to threaten the White Sox 121 right now? And they're on pace to do that. Now, they're going to fall into winning streaks, such as the one that just happened now. But they could turn around and maybe go into another 8-game losing streak, which they've already had 4 of this year. And I'd have to look at the schedule to see whom they played. I don't know if they played the White Sox just yet, which is a team that's pretty much in their ilk, although the White Sox just a smidge better. Or the Pirates, or another bad team, maybe the Athletics. I don't know if they played them just yet, where they're going to probably fall into a couple of games that they'll win here. But I have to say, right now, I'm sure they're going to look at that number, 121, that they do not want to go above that. They want to try to go beneath that and certainly match it. And that's, of course, the White Sox losing, or the amount of losses that they had last year. So way too early. We're still in early June. And yes, they're still on pace to win probably, 27, 28 games, which will obliterate the White Sox and even the Met record of 41-20. So as the summer continues and when we get to the dog days, etc., we'll see where the Rockies land over the course of the season. And then if you're a Yankee fan, I know you got to be shaking in your boots a little bit because you found out that Luke Weaver is going to be on the IL 4 to 6 weeks with a hamstring injury that he tweaked here over the last couple of days. I didn't see the injury, but knowing that he's out and he's been rock solid this year, now you have no choice but to pitch Devin Williams in the 9th inning, which I know could be just disastrous. And I know he's shown signs of coming out of it, but every time he takes 2 steps forward, he always takes 3 steps back. Now, the Yankees are going to have no choice. What are you going to do? Bullpen by committee, which I think that's what Aaron Boone's going to do until he feels 100% confident in order to put Williams in the closer role for the 9th inning. But he may have no choice because are you going to put Tim Hill there? Are you going to put Jonathan Loaizaga there? Or are you going to put any other guy that he may have some confidence in to give the ball in the 9th inning in a big spot? I don't know. It's going to be very dicey, but the Yankees have a big cushion there in the American League East, so he has the luxury of trying to mix and match or trying to come up with solutions there to piecemeal a 9th inning, so it's not as if they're in the teeth of an early division run where he has a team that's neck and neck or breathing down their necks that's right behind them. He doesn't have to worry about that. But Luke Weaver out till probably, I would think, the All-Star break or maybe a week prior to that. So we'll have to monitor what Weaver's progress is going to be as he tries to work his way back into the Yankee bullpen. But besides that, there isn't anything else I can really unpack or discuss there when it comes to baseball. Standings are what the standings are. Now, I know the Twins lost Pablo Lopez out for 8 to 12 weeks with a shoulder injury, and that's going to be a huge loss for them because now they've thrusted themselves into second place. Now, mind you, it's the slimmest of margins between them, the Guardians, and the Royals. They have a half-game lead over the Guardians and a 2-game lead over the Royals, but because they had such a tremendous winning streak and it played so well, to lose a guy like Lopez is a killer. I'm not trying to make him out to be Bert Blyleven when he was there with the Twins winning World Series in the late 80s, early 90s, but that's a significant loss to a team that needs all hands on deck in order for them to be a part of a pennant race because they could go out and try to get reinforcements at the deadline, but we all know they're not going to go big game hunting. They're going to go for a third starter and below to try to be able to get any reinforcement for the rotation to make a stretch run for division or wild card berth. So just keep that in mind as we move it along. But as it is, Yankees with a 6-game lead in the East. Tigers 5-game, although 6 games behind, but 5 in a loss. And the Astros have now overtaken the Mariners by a half game, tied in the loss there with 28. Now you have the Mets and Phillies separated by 1 game, but a game and a half there in the standings. Cubs, 4-game lead as they try to extend and get some cushion there on the Cardinals. And then the Dodgers tied in the loss with the Padres, but the Padres have 2 games in hand. So the Dodgers try to look to get a win and maybe get some breathing room from the Padres, even the Giants. And that's another series we got to take a look at here because the Padres won the first 2 games in extra innings, and all these games have been close. 3-2, 1-0, and then 6-5 last night where the Giants were able to beat the Padres. So now the Giants will look for a split, which would be no harm, no foul. But in order for them to not lose 2 games in the standings, or at least in the West, they would have to win today for it to be a situation where, again, there was no big-time change in the standings. Like I mentioned, no harm, no foul. So we'll see how that shakes down. But as far as the schedule for the weekend in baseball, and there was another big series this week, Detroit and Kansas City. And I think Detroit, let me go back and check that here real quick, people. The Tigers, no, they're playing the White Sox. I got Kansas City and Cleveland. I think that's what the series. Well, Cleveland's playing the Yankees. I got my teams all mixed up here, people, so my apologies. So let's just look at the schedule real quick for the weekend. And as we wrap up today, yeah, Casey's in St. Louis, Philly, Toronto, Minnesota. Yeah, the games into the weekend that we'll take a look at. You have Miami and Tampa. That's a Florida. I mean, nothing to talk about there. Only the in-state rivals that they are. Philly and Pittsburgh. Paul Skeens loses again. Yankees, Red Sox, the first time they meet. And Walker Buehler is actually coming off the IL to pitch there tomorrow night. And I'm sure the Yankee fan, they're going to want to avert their eyes when he throws the first pitch because the last time Walker Buehler was on that mound, he closed out the Yankees in the World Series last year. Cubs and Tigers. That's a big series there in Detroit. Maybe a possible World Series matchup. Houston at Cleveland. San Diego, Milwaukee. Dodgers in St. Louis. Mariners at Angels. Baltimore at Athletics. Braves and the Giants. So you have some good series. Arizona, Cincinnati. Diamondbacks and Reds. So yeah, there are a few series to look at here. Toronto, Minnesota. As we get into the first full weekend of June. And Monday we'll recap and see where we're at there. Now, let me wrap up here with the tennis because we have some intrigue and a fascinating weekend at Roland Garros. And in fact, let me see what's happening live out at Roland Garros because you have an epic matchup taking place as I'm recording this, as I speak, on the women's side between Aryna Sabalenka and Iga Świątek. And right now, as we look at it, where the nightcap is going to be Coco Gauff, and I'll get to her in a second. Right now, you have Sabalenka winning the first set in a tiebreaker, 7-6, 7. And then Świątek is up 4-2 in the second set. So Świątek, as you know, has won the last 3 French Opens, 4 of the last 5. This is her domain, as I've said. And Świątek, who's played very well here in this tournament and has not really played very well at the beginning of this tennis season. But Świątek, let's see if she can get back to a final and defend her 3-time in consecutive order championships there at Roland Garros. So unfortunately, the match will still go on while I'm recording this because obviously the last leg of the podcast. But you have that, and then you have Coco Gauff, who beat Madison Keys in a 3-set match, which was very good, although Coco Gauff certainly got her bearings and beat her in the last 2 sets, 6-4, 6-1, after losing in the tie-breaking first set, 6-7, I think it was 6-7, 6. But for Gauff, this is going to be an interesting test because he's going up against a woman that was a wild card, unranked, and is from Paris. I believe she's from Paris. I know from France for sure, but goes by the name of Louise Boisson. And Boisson, who's made it this far, and the whole region is going to be rooting for Busan. And in the previous match where she beat Mira Andreeva, and Andreeva was even taken aback by the cheers for Busan and took it a little even personal for that matter. So if Andreeva felt like that, how's this going to play out for Coco Gauff? Because I talked about Gauff, who's had a very good run here in this tournament, but has not made it back to winning a championship since 2 years ago at the US Open, and has not really played well over the last year plus, but now has a great shot to get to a final, to go up against either Sabalenka or Świątek. And Świątek has been a kryptonite here over the last few years. So Gauff is certainly going to be the underdog from the participants and the audience, because you know they're going to go full force for Busan to win this semifinal matchup, and then therefore try to will her to a final to see whether or not she could bring the championship, the French Open title, where it should be, home in Paris. So you have a very interesting storyline with that matchup, and that's going to be after Sabalenka and Świątek. So stay tuned on my YouTube channel to see how that's going to play out, and you'll get my analysis of that. But right now, Sabalenka, who now just won the 3rd game, so it's now 4-3 Świątek, and before I sign off, we'll see if maybe Świątek could close out this 2nd set and push it to a 3rd, or will Sabalenka, this will be another tiebreaker where it could go the distance. We'll see what's going to happen there. And then on the men's side, boy, you have really matches for the ages, but I will say this. If you're Carlos Alcaraz, you have no excuse to get to a final, and that's not a knock on Lorenzo Mazzetti, the Italian, who was able to get to this point and now will face Alcaraz, where Alcaraz just has him standing in front of Jannik Sinner and Novak Djokovic, who will go at it tomorrow on the men's side. And Djokovic, who beat Alexander Zverev after losing the first set, wins in 4. And then for Sinner to dispose of Bublik, and I have my matchup set. I thought Mazzetti was facing Sinner, but it was Bublik, who will try to be game against Sinner, but was no match for the #1 ranked tennis player in the world. So now you have an epic clash between the old guard and the new, between Sinner and Alcaraz. And let's see if Alcaraz has one last stand, because at 38 years of age, the opportunities are going to start to dwindle despite his greatness. And does he have one last hurrah to get to a final? And to think, if he's going to win this French Open, he's going to earn it by beating not only Zverev, the 3rd ranked player in the world, but now he's going to have to face the top player in the world in Sinner. And then if he does beat him, he's going to have to face the 2nd best player in the world, and one Carlos Alcaraz. So to me, both the men's and women's side is dripping with just intrigue, drama, suspense. Hopefully we get long sets and long matches here, and looks like that's going to be the case there on the women's side to start, as we talked about. But I am riveted by how this is going to unfold. I'm going to try to do my best to watch every one of these matches. I know I didn't watch a lot of these matches heading into today, but listen, obviously I have to talk about it. I could just go by highlights alone, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to cheat you guys and gals. I'm going to try to lock myself in to watch a lot of these matches, get a great feel, and as it is, to know that it's come down to this, to where you have all these heavyweights, Sabalenka, Świątek, Gauff, Alcaraz, Sinner, Djokovic. I mean, you couldn't ask for anything more if you're a tennis fan. And even if you're a good sports fan, this is something you got to pay attention to. This is something you got to watch. This is like watching Rory Bryson DeChambeau, guys like that on the final round of a major tournament, as you saw there in the Masters. This is something that you have to keep on your radar. You just can't, all right, no. Come on, if you're a sports fan, you got to be on top of it. And you know what, yours truly, I'm going to deliver this to you in a nice package with a bow on top, no matter what the sport. So we'll uncover it all Monday. Stay tuned to the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ for updates when it comes to these matches and how the tournament will unfold over these next few days. And obviously culminating in Sunday with a championship, because this is what it's all about, people. We're at the point of the year, whether it's the French Open here, later in the month with Wimbledon, in the middle of the month with the US Open Golf, I believe it's in Oakmont, and then now with the NBA and Stanley Cup Finals, now it is time. This is the month to crown champions. And how this is all going to shake down right in front of our eyes is for us to witness, and even more so, for me to share my thoughts and my feelings about all of it. And I thank you for taking the time out and carving out precious time out of your day in doing so. And that will conclude the podcast. So people, you know what to do. Subscribe, rate, review, throw me a few stars, write a review, all that good stuff on all available platforms. Apple, Spotify, again, the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. This is the little engine that could, people. Trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. I've been stuck at 638 now for about 5-6 days. And Lord knows, there's a lot of work, the smoke that I want, but I do need your help. So please share it with the sports fan in your life, whether they're a good sports fan, a great sports fan, diehard, casual, whatever. To your family, friends, foes, frenemies, take a screenshot of it, send it to them on social media, even tag me on social media. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, or at JAYREELZ on Instagram. Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just a number. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, suggestion, you can do it the old-fashioned way, whether it is on my social media accounts or the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. This is why I quit my job almost 16 months ago. That's right. Since February 2024, I've been doing this full time, independently, trying to generate income, which slowly but surely I'm doing. Doing what I love. This is my passion, people. If you weren't able to hear this over the last hour plus, that means you got to come back. That means you got to come back on Monday. That means you got to check the live stream on Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. The next podcast, the following Thursday. I'll have shorts to put up on YouTube, as I mentioned, or on my social media accounts. I have critique videos on the docket. I have so much that I need to unpack, uncover, lifestyle, content, vlogs, you name it. Because as long as I'm alive, breathing, sitting in front of this camera and microphone, I will deliver nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond. Peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.